I'll probably record the round as well. So, hi everyone. My name is William Kiker. I'm a 29, and this is the Moot Court interest meeting. We're so excited to see all of you guys here. I talk kind of fast, so if you have questions, you can ask them, but I suspect that what all of you want to see is the case, and that case is going to happen immediately after this presentation is over. So I'm going to try to go through the presentation really quickly. It's not the most visually appealing presentation. I'm not a good graphic designer, but it gets the job done. So, what is Dartmouth Moot Court? So, we were founded just last term in the fall of this year, and we are a no tryout, legally competitive team. So, we engage in appellate arguments in written and oral competitions. So, there are oral argument tournaments where they're doing basically what you're about to see, and there are tournaments where you write briefs on the issue. And the thing that distinguishes us from mock trial, the thing that makes moot court unique, is that we do it as if it's a Supreme Court argument. It's not like, in mock trial, they're calling witnesses and they're like objecting to things. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're saying, Your Honor, Chief Justice, may it please the court. And we're arguing like they would in the actual United States Supreme Court. So some of the stuff that we have been doing, we were founded in September, only like 10 days into our freshman falls, we founded Moot Court. We got recognition as an official student organization in October. In November, we were registering for tournaments that happened over December. And we had two competitions that happened in December. One was the written brief competition. We had, me and Sophia had a written brief. These two together had a written brief. And Luca and the person who just left the room, Alice, had a written brief together. We're awaiting results on that. We hope it went really well. And then me and Ben competed in a virtual tournament called the McAllister Invitational, which went super well. It was the first tournament in program history, and we outcompeted a lot of schools that have much more competitive and much older programs than us. We outranked teams from Harvard, we outranked teams from McAllister College, which doesn't sound like anything to you, but that's a very competitive team in the world of moot court. So the little team that could, I guess. So here's the structure of a moot court round. What you're going to see is a little bit different because in a regular moot court round, there's two teams of two. In the interest of time, we cut out, you see this, petitioner 2 and respondent 2. We cut out those time blocks just to make this round go a little bit faster. But in a regular moot court round, what happens is you have two teams of two. One of the teams represents the petitioner. That's the side that has appealed from the lower court. The other side represents the respondent. They're the side that won in the lower court. These time blocks that you see are not speeches. So in moot court, we actually don't give speeches. What we do is we introduce arguments, and then we're vigorously questioned by the judges. So what you're going to see in just a little bit is that Ben will start talking, and then like a minute into his speech, I'm immediately going to jump into questions. And that's what those time periods that you see are filled with. They're not filled with just like, you talking to the judges. They're filled with the judges asking questions to you. And it can get a little testy, right? Judges love to interrupt. And I'm going to be doing a lot of interrupting, and it's going to be super fun, and it's super fun to respond to as well. So what are we doing right now? So the winter term is kind of our off season, which is why this was a good time for us to do recruitment, do this kind of event, because the case that we're going to be working on next year releases in May, and then competitions will happen in the months of October, November, and December if we make it to nationals January and February. So right now we're doing recruitment, and we're also planning for something called the intramural tournament. You'll hear more about this if you join the club, but basically we're going to do a tournament within the club on this case that you're going to see. So on Lorax v. Onceler, it's going to be an introduction to oral argument, an introduction to maybe a little bit of brief writing in a super accessible way, and in a way that's not super competitive and stressful because you're not going to be competing against schools or against teams from other schools. That's what you're immediately going to jump into if you were to join the club. And then we're planning a little bit for the spring term, which is on the next slide, because the spring term is going to be kind of busy for us. So intramural tournament is in February, gives you some introductory experience. In the spring, we're going to have the new case, we're going to have officer elections, and we're going to be recruiting the 30s at Dimensions. So the cool thing is, since this is our first year in operation, when you see officer elections in the spring, there's no reason why that can't be you. Because obviously we have a lot of experienced members that are super involved. We also have some members that got officer positions when the club was originally founded and didn't really stick with it. So in spring officer elections, there's going to be a lot of vacancies if you guys are interested in being officers. I suspect that some of you will be our future officers. And then in the fall of next year is when we're actually going to start competing in in-person and online tournaments and written brief competitions and that kind of thing. So some information for new members is that this team does not have tryouts, never will have tryouts, doesn't have tryouts for members, doesn't have tryouts within the organization. There are, I'm not going to name names, but there are some organizations on campus that have tryouts to join, and then if you want to go to a competition, they have a tryout within the team to go to the competition. We're not doing that. We think that's dumb. We think that if you want to do moot court, if you want to be involved in moot court, if this is your activity, you should be allowed to, because we think this is a really fun and awesome activity that we want to expand and that we want to be accessible. So we are never, ever, ever going to host a tryout. And we're also not going to have super high expectations that if you join, you have to be involved in everything. I do want to qualify that though, which is that what we believe in is that you're going to get as much out of this team as you put in, right? So if you are super involved, right, you're going to all the practices, you're doing all the competitions, you're doing a lot of work in terms of like writing briefs and stuff like that, you're going to get a lot more out of moot court in terms of the community, in terms of law school, in terms of the benefits that we'll talk about in just a second, than someone who just goes to the meetings and doesn't really do a whole lot of work outside of that, right? So to the extent possible, if you want to go to a competition, if you want to do anything with the club, we want to help you and we want to make sure that happens. And we never want to make selections. If we ever do have to make selections, which will always be as a last resort, we're not going to do it on a tryout basis. We're going to do it on the basis of who has been showing up the most, who has been putting in the most effort, that kind of thing, not necessarily skill. So during the winter, we have meetings every Sunday from 4 to 5 p.m. If that time doesn't work for you, talk to me because we might be able to work something out. In the spring, that's going to extend. We're going to extend our Sunday meetings to 4 to 6, and then we're going to add a 5 to 6 meeting on Tuesday. That's just because we're so much busier in the spring. We need to accommodate time to have more practice rounds, to have more planning, right? There's just more stuff going on, so we need more meetings. And then the first activity that you guys will participate in, if you were to join, is that intramural tournament that's happening in late February. And we have created, the lovely Ben Burma and Ben Sklaru have created an info guide, a guide for new mooters that we'll give to you if you were to join at the next meeting, which is tomorrow right here. If you can't make tomorrow, that's perfectly fine. You can go to the one after that. I think February 1st is the next Sunday. Go to whichever you're able to. So there are 3 big benefits of moot court, which is why we're so passionate about this activity and why we want to expand this activity. So obviously you learn, right? You learn about the law, you read a bunch of cases, you learn about relevant case law, that kind of thing. But you also learn how to construct arguments, how to speak persuasively, how to answer questions persuasively. And those are skills that are useful even outside of the context of law, right? Because we have some people, Ben Sklaru and like Alice, and we have a bunch of people on the team that aren't planning on going into law, aren't like pre-law students, but you can still learn a lot from doing an activity like moot court. And we also think there's a large community aspect. Right, so most of the people on the team are 29s, but even if you're not 29s, like most of us are underclassmen, and you have an opportunity to join a community that's going to be spending quite a bit of time together, that gets to know each other pretty well, and that's super inclusive and supportive and wants to support you and like wants to help you grow, right? And that has been a big part of my freshman fall. Like finding that kind of community in moot court has been genuinely super helpful to me in adjusting to college, and obviously we're all adjusted to college now. But if that's something that you're looking for, that kind of tight-knit community, you'll definitely get that here. And then for the people in here who are pre-law, which I suspect is probably like half of you, moot court is super good for law school. So in high school, right, moot court is super small, mock trial is super big. In college, it evens out a little bit more, maybe mock trial is a little bit bigger than moot court. In law school, it is overwhelmingly moot court. Right? Way more common in law school than it is in undergrad or in high school. So if you want to get a jump start on the kind of activities that you'll be doing in law school, moot court is super helpful for you. And it can also help in admissions, right? Being a mooter is going to give you some kind of leg up on your, is it that? Okay. Is going to give you some kind of leg up on your application compared to people who aren't. So with that, I'll give you a quick overview of the case, and then we'll get to the actual argument. So, Lorax v. Onceler is a case that I made up, and these are the facts. So, the Onceler purchased land in a town called South Stitch, and that land included all of the truffula trees in the state of Susia. When he cut down the first, and a lot of this is taken from, like, you know, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I remember like a few days ago thinking, what has my life come to, when I was walking into the Dr. Seuss room to get a copy of the Lorax book so I can put cases into a moot court case. I'm like, how has my life come to this? But anyway, so when the first tree was cut down, the Lorax emerged from the stump, and then he lobbied, this next part didn't happen in the actual Lorax, to be clear. He lobbied the South Stitch Town Council to pass an anti-truffula tree ordinance, but once they did that, the Onceler convinced the mayor not to enforce the ordinance. So Lorax sued. He said he speaks for the trees, and he compelled the mayor to enforce the ordinance. He won that lawsuit, and then Onceler countersued that Lorax can't do that, right? He can't speak for the trees. Onceler lost in the district court. He appealed to the circuit court, and then he won. And then Lorax has now appealed to the Supreme Court, and that brings us to today. So this case centers on Lorax not suffering direct injury, but he's suing on behalf of trees who were injured. So all of you should have just gotten a ballot from the lovely Alice. The ballot has the way you're going to evaluate how strong the presentations that you're going to hear are. On the other side on the ballot, on the back, there are some guidelines for like the official AMCA, American Moot Court Association guidelines for how you decide what scores to give people. And then you're going to make a ruling. You're going to decide, do you rule for petitioner, which is the Lorax, or do you rule for respondent, which is the Onceler? And we're going to count the votes, and by the end of this meeting, you're going to know who won the case. So with that, I am going to change from meeting organizer mode to judge mode. So I'm going to sit right there. I'm going to start, and I'm going to be asking questions just like you would in a regular moot court round. We're going to call up Ben first. And yeah, so Scholar, you need to, you were going to record the actual round, right? Because I need to flip my computer over.
Okay.